Imagine a country almost the size of half a continent. A country nearly 4 times larger than France with access to 2 oceans, thousands of kilometers of coastline, mountains, jungles, deserts, volcanoes, and fertile valleys. It would seem that people should have spread across it evenly, some near the sea, some in river valleys, some on plains, some closer to the borders, but Mexico is arranged in a completely different way. A huge part of its territory is almost empty. You can drive for hours through the north of the country and see only dry land, mountains, cacti, and rare roads disappearing into the horizon. You can find yourself in the southern jungles, surrounded by an ocean of green, but with almost no major cities. And then, suddenly, you reach the center of the country, where tens of millions of people live in high mountain valleys, among volcanoes, traffic jams, skyscrapers, and old colonial streets. By various estimates, around 80% of Mexico's territory is very sparsely populated. There are roads, villages, and some towns there, but compared with the center of the country, these spaces look almost empty, and this is Mexico's main paradox. This is not a small country where people simply have nowhere to spread out. There is more than enough land here, but most of the population has concentrated on a relatively small area in the center of the country, and not by the sea, not on warm plains, not near the beaches many people associate with Mexico, but high in the mountains, on a plateau where the air is already noticeably thinner. Why did this happen? Why did the vast north remain almost uninhabited? Why did the humid south, with its jungles, not become a second heart of the country? Why did Mexico City, one of the largest megacities on the planet, grow not on the coast, but at an altitude of more than 2 kilometers above sea level? And why is the real Mexico far less like a postcard of beaches and cacti than it seems? To understand this, we need to begin not with history, and not even with economics. We need to begin with the map. Because Mexico was shaped first of all by geography. When you look at the country's terrain, it becomes clear this is not a soft, convenient plain where people could easily spread in every direction. Mexico is a vast, folded, raised, broken-up land. To the west runs a powerful mountain system, the Sierra Madre Occidental. To the east, the Sierra Madre Oriental. Between them lies the Great Central Plateau. And farther south, the country is crossed by a volcanic belt that cuts across it from west to east. So Mexico is not simply a country with mountains. It is a country where mountains are the skeleton. They determine where people can live, where roads can be built, where there is water, where there is soil, and where a person can only pass through. A large part of the country lies more than 1 kilometer above sea level. That sounds beautiful, but for life and farming it is a major challenge. Where there is no flat land, building cities is hard. Where there are steep slopes, laying railways is hard. Where there are canyons and mountain ranges, connecting regions to each other is hard. That is why many parts of Mexico remained isolated for centuries. Neighboring areas could be not thousands of kilometers apart, but only a few dozen. Yet if mountains, cliffs, and canyons stood between them, then for trade and migration it was almost like being in another country. In Mexico, mountains are not background scenery, they are walls. And the first reason for Mexico's emptiness is exactly this. A large part of the country is physically uncomfortable for dense human life. There is too much stone, too many slopes, canyons, high plateaus, and hard-to-reach regions, but mountains are only the beginning. The second reason is even harsher. Water. Northern Mexico is enormous, but much of it is dry. This is not the tropical paradise many people imagine when they think of the country. It is a space of deserts, dry steppes, and rocky plains where rain is rare, rivers are weak, and the sun burns the land for most of the year. Here lie large desert regions where life has always existed on the edge. Yes, you can find individual cities, farms, mines, and roads there, but dense population is impossible without water. Because water is the foundation of everything. Without water, there is no harvest. Without harvests, there are no villages. Without villages, there are no cities. Without cities, there is no dense network of life. This is especially clear on the Baja California Peninsula. A long, narrow strip of land stretches for more than 1,000 kilometers, but most of it is a dry, harsh, almost desert world. The sea is nearby, the views are stunning, but there is little fresh water. And without fresh water, a coastline does not automatically become convenient for life for a long time. This peninsula was so detached from the main body of Mexico that traveling there felt like an expedition. It was part of the country on the map, but not part of its dense human fabric. So the north is empty not because nobody needs it. It is empty because large-scale life there is difficult. Roads can be built, minerals can be mined, individual cities can grow. But turning vast dry spaces into a densely populated region is extremely hard. There is land. There is no water ... and that changes everything. But then comes the most interesting Mexican paradox. In most countries, people have tended to move toward the sea. Coastlines usually become centers of trade, life, and wealth. There are ports, fish, milder climates, and links to the outside world. In Mexico, it happened differently. The main population of the country ended up not by the sea, but high in the center on the plateau. There, the capital lies more than 2,200 meters above sea level. For comparison, that is higher than many European mountain resorts. For a visitor from the lowlands, such altitude is already noticeable. You get tired faster, climbing stairs feels harder. The air seems thinner, but for Mexico, this altitude became salvation. The reason is climate. Mexico lies in tropical latitudes. If the country were flat, much of it would be very hot. Coastal lowlands are often humid, heavy, and exhausting to live in. In the past, dangerous diseases also spread there. Malaria, yellow fever, and other infections that made life near the coast risky. But in the mountains, everything is different. As altitude increases, temperature drops, and on the central plateau appears the climate often called eternal spring. No exhausting heat, no harsh winter, but mild, relatively stable weather all year round. That is why people moved not downward, but upward. For Mexico, altitude became not a punishment, but an advantage. There it was easier to live in terms of climate, easier to work, easier to grow food, easier to build a stable society. Locals long ago divided the country into altitude-based climate zones, hot land near the sea, more temperate land higher up, cold land in the mountains. And the most desirable zone was precisely the temperate one, where there was neither tropical suffocation nor mountain cold. That is how Mexico reversed the usual logic of settlement in other countries. People moved down toward the sea. In Mexico, they climbed up from it, not for beautiful views, for climate, water, health, and crops. Over time, the people of the highlands partly adapted to the thinner air. For a tourist, Mexico City's altitude can be a challenge, but for a local, it is simply home. People are born there, work there, and live there, in a place where someone from the coast may initially struggle just to walk quickly, but geography alone would not be enough to understand why the center of Mexico became the country's main magnet. We need to look deeper into history. The Central Plateau was the heart of this land long before modern Mexico appeared here. Among volcanoes and lakes, great civilizations rose. This was where Tenochtitlan stood, the capital of the Aztecs. One of the largest cities of its time, it stood on islands in the middle of a lake, connected by causeways and canals with markets, temples, roads, and a complex economic system. This was not a random city in a random place. The Central Valley offered what a large society needed: a mild climate, water, fertile soil, protection, and a strong position among surrounding lands. Volcanic ash made the soil especially rich. Lakes provided water and food, and artificial gardens in shallow water made it possible to grow crops where there had once been open water. The Aztecs did not simply live among lakes. They learned how to turn water into food. When the Spanish arrived. They could have moved the capital somewhere else. To the coast, for example, closer to sea trade, but they did not. They destroyed Tenochtitlan and built their own city directly on top of it. So the ancient center became the colonial center, and later the center of independent Mexico. The place did not lose power. It only changed owners. Later, another force was added to this pull: silver. In the mountains of central and northern Mexico, huge deposits were discovered. Silver mines became one of the main sources of wealth for the Spanish Empire. Around the mines grew cities, roads, cathedrals, mansions, and entire trade routes. But even the silver cities were often not a new, even network of settlement, but isolated islands of life among mountains and dry lands. As long as the mines were rich, the city grew. When the deposits ran out, life often faded, so Mexico again and again confirmed the same pattern. Dense life held on where nature and history gave it support. And where there was no support, cities could flare up and then fade away. Volcanoes played a separate role in this story, at first glance. Living next to active volcanoes seems insane. They can release ash, cause fear, and remind people of earthquakes and disaster. But for Mexico, volcanoes became not only a threat, but also a source of life. Over time, volcanic ash turns into fertile soil. Such land can feed people well. Mountain rains and snow feed the valleys with water, and altitude creates a mild climate, so a strange bargain emerges. People live near dangerous mountains because those same mountains make the land rich. In central Mexico, this bargain was made on a huge scale. Cities grew in valleys between volcanoes. Millions of people live in a landscape that is at once beautiful, fertile, and dangerous, and at the center of it all stands Mexico City, one of the largest megacities on Earth, a city whose metropolitan area is home to tens of millions of people, a city that became the political, cultural, economic, and historical core of the country. Mexico City is not just a capital, it is a giant magnet that has pulled people toward it for centuries. People go there for work, education, medicine, opportunities, power, money, and a future, and the larger the city became, the stronger it attracted more people. Because where everything already exists, even more reasons appear to come. But such concentration has a terrible price. Mexico City stands on the bottom of a former lake. The Spanish drained the vast water system that once supported Tenochtitlan, and now the city lives on soft, unstable soil. Under its own weight, and because of the pumping of groundwater, the capital is literally sinking. In some places, the ground has dropped by meters. Buildings tilt, pipes break, streets deform. This is one of the strangest paradoxes of the city. It was built in a place that once had plenty of water, but today it suffers from a lack of it. The megacity needs enormous amounts of water. It pumps underground reserves, and that makes the ground sink even more. The more the city drinks, the more it sinks. And that is not the only problem. Mexico City lies in a seismically active zone. Earthquakes here are especially dangerous because the soft bottom of the former lake amplifies the shaking. The ground behaves like jelly, supporting heavy buildings. As a result, seismic waves can be more destructive here than in areas with harder ground. Then there is the air. The capital lies in a mountain basin. The surrounding ridges act like the walls of a bowl. They prevent winds from freely carrying pollution away. Millions of cars, factories, dense construction, all of this creates smog that can become trapped above the city, so Mexico City simultaneously struggles with water shortages, sinking ground, earthquakes, traffic jams, polluted air, and overpopulation. And still people continue to move there. Why? Because a center of attraction built over centuries does not disappear quickly. If power, universities, money, culture, government institutions, major companies, and millions of jobs are concentrated in one place, people will move there despite the risks. This is both Mexico's strength and its weakness. On one hand, The huge capital makes the country powerful and governable from a single center. On the other, when too much is gathered in one place, any problem in that place becomes a problem for the whole country. If a major earthquake, a water crisis, a transport collapse, or an epidemic hits the capital, it is no longer a local disaster. It becomes a national blow. Many people have long said that Mexico needs to relieve pressure on the center, develop other cities, and move some industry and population into new regions. But that is easier said than done. People go where life already exists, and life most often appears where people already go. That is the loop of the big city. Now let us look at the south. If the north is empty because of dryness, then the south, it would seem, should be the complete opposite. It is humid, green, full of rain, tropical forests, and rich nature. So why did it not become the main population center? Because water alone does not make a region easy to live in. Southern Mexico is a different kind of difficulty, not desert emptiness, but green remoteness. Jungles, humidity, heat, mountains, poor accessibility, poverty, weak infrastructure. Dense tropical forest can be just as much of a barrier as a desert. It hides the land, blocks roads, complicates construction, and makes life difficult. In the past, humid lowlands were also associated with disease, while the hot climate was exhausting for constant labor. The southeast, where the Maya once flourished, still remains rural, poor, and hard to reach in many places. There are cities, resorts, archaeological sites, and tourist zones, but large inland spaces remain sparsely populated. Yucatan is especially interesting at first glance. The peninsula is flat and should be convenient, but it has its own water mystery. There are almost no surface rivers. Limestone allows rainwater to seep downward, forming underground rivers and cenotes, natural freshwater wells for the ancient Maya. Such places were sacred and vital. Settlements often appeared around cenotes because without them, there was simply nowhere to get water. So even where there was no desert, water still dictated the map of life. Of course, there are striking exceptions in the south. The best-known one is the Caribbean coast, where Cancun grew. Today it is a global resort with hotels, beaches, an airport, and millions of tourists. But not very long ago, this place was a small fishing area. Cancun shows that life can ignite quickly even where there was almost nothing before, if infrastructure, money, and outside demand appear. But it is important to understand, a resort is not the same as the even settlement of a region. Tourist cities grow in points, between them, vast forests, villages, and hard-to-reach areas can still remain. Southern Mexico is not empty like a desert. It is empty in another way. It is green, humid, alive, but often isolated, poor, and difficult to develop. In some mountain and forest regions, there are still settlements that are hard to reach. People there speak indigenous languages, live rural lives, and remain weakly connected to the larger urban Mexico. So the South did not become the country's second center not because nature was absent, but because nature was too powerful. Jungles, heat, humidity, and mountains became obstacles no less serious than northern dryness, but Mexico has not remained frozen forever. In recent decades, the country's map has begun to change, especially in the north, that same north which for centuries was dry and sparsely populated, suddenly gained a new advantage: proximity to the United States. The border with the United States became a powerful economic line. Along it grew industrial cities, factories, warehouses, and logistics centers. Goods are assembled in Mexico and sent to the American market. This created millions of jobs. People began moving north not because there was more water or a milder climate. They went there because work appeared. So the desert periphery turned into an industrial belt. Border cities began growing rapidly. Places that had once been dusty peripheral settlements turned into major urban areas. They are sometimes linked to the United States even more strongly than to Mexico City. because the American city next door may be only a few kilometers away, while their own capital lies across half the country. Beyond mountains and deserts, this is another Mexican paradox. Some northern cities look economically north, across the border, rather than south, toward the capital, but the old geography has not disappeared. Water is still scarce. The fast-growing cities of northern Mexico increasingly face water stress. Factories, population, transport, housing, all of it requires resources that are limited in a desert climate, so today the North is no longer just a desert. It is a desert with powerful industrial clusters. But between these clusters, enormous, sparsely populated spaces still remain. The same is happening on the coasts. Tourism and ports are developing individual zones. Resort cities appear, logistics hubs grow, roads are built. But this does not turn the entire country into an even network of cities. Mexico is populated in clusters. One powerful cluster is the center of the country. Others are the northern border, individual industrial cities, tourist coasts, and port zones. Between them still lies a huge territory of mountains, deserts, forests, and rural regions. In this, Mexico is somewhat similar to Canada or Australia. There, too, most people live in narrow, habitable belts, while gigantic spaces remain almost empty. But the difference is that Mexico's emptiness is not caused by permafrost or by total isolation in the middle of a continent. Mexico is warm. It is next to oceans. It is ancient, culturally rich, and has been inhabited for thousands of years, and still, most of its land has not become a dense home for people. The reason is a special combination: mountains, altitude, drought, jungles, diseases of the past, difficult roads, and the historical pull of the center. It is also worth clearing up a few myths about Mexico. The first myth is that Mexico is old desert, like in old movies, cacti, dust, sombreros, and heat. In reality, that desert image mainly fits the north. The heart of Mexico is made of highland regions where it can be cool, green, and nothing like a scorched desert. The second myth is that Mexico is mostly a country of beaches. Its beaches really are magnificent. The Caribbean Sea, the Pacific Ocean, resorts, white sand, turquoise water. All of that is real, but most Mexicans do not live by the sea. The main mass of the population is concentrated inland, at altitude. Far from the coasts. The third myth is that Mexico is mostly rural and agricultural. In reality, modern Mexico is highly urbanized. Most people live in cities, often in very large cities. Over the last century, the country experienced a massive move from villages to cities. Millions left rural areas and moved to where there were factories, offices, universities, roads, and jobs, and this process emptied the countryside even more. If earlier people lived in villages even in difficult places, then as the economy developed, they began leaving those regions. Young people moved to the capital, to the north, to tourist zones, to industrial cities. And old rural areas became even quieter, so the real Mexico is not one picture. Not only beaches, not only deserts, not only ancient pyramids, and not only Mexico City, it is a country of sharp contrasts. A highland megacity and an empty desert road. A resort with hotels and a village in the jungle. Volcanic valleys and dry canyons. An industrial border and ancient indigenous settlements. Millions of people in one basin and vast territories where there are almost no people. So, why is most of Mexico empty? Because people settled not simply where land existed, but where life was possible. The north offered space, but not water. The mountains gave protection and climate, but took away roads and flat land. The south gave moisture, but also heat, jungles, and isolation. The coasts offered the sea, but for a long time they were too hot, humid, and unhealthy for dense life. And the center offered a rare combination: mild climate, water, fertile volcanic soils, ancient history, and power, and that was enough to fix the heart of the country there for thousands of years. People in Mexico settled not where it was most beautiful, but where they could breathe, drink water, grow food, and build cities. That is why today one part of the country is overloaded with people, transport, housing, and problems, and another part remains almost empty, not because it belongs to no one, but because nature set a high price for life there. Mexico is a lesson in the fact that population maps are never random. They are drawn not only by people, but by mountains, rivers, diseases, soils, roads, climate, and the past, and even in the 21st century, when we have airplanes, tunnels, pumps, air conditioners, and satellites. Geography is still stronger than it seems. It decides where a megacity appears, where a factory grows, where a village remains, and where, for hundreds of kilometers, there will be only a dry road, cacti, and mountains to the horizon. And Mexico's future will also depend on this geography. If the climate becomes drier, northern cities will struggle even more with water. If industry continues to grow along the border, new millions of people will move there. If the center is not relieved, Mexico City will keep fighting over population, sinking land, and a shortage of resources. If the South receives roads, jobs, and investment, it may begin to change, but the jungles and mountains will not disappear. Mexico will move, but not purely according to human desire. It will move within the limits nature has set for it. And this is the main meaning of this country. Its emptiness is not an accident and not a mistake. It is the result of a 1,000-year agreement between people and landscape. The mountains said, "It will be hard to pass here." The desert said, "It will be hard to drink here." The jungle said, "It will be hard to build here." And the central plateau said, "Here it is possible to live," and people chose it. That is why the heart of Mexico beats not by the sea, but high above it, among volcanoes, old lakes, sinking ground, and millions of people who for centuries have continued to live in the most convenient, yet far from simple, corner that nature left for them. If you found this story interesting, like the video and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories ahead about how geography changes the fate of countries and people. See you next time.